2003.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, I finally found what I was looking for. Thank God.
Okay.
I apologize that took a little bit, but yeah, let's start off by setting the stage. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Claire Gysegem, and I am a member of the Athens City Commission on Disabilities, and I am on the Education and Outreach Committee, of which this conversation is the brainchild of. So I'm joined by Berry Dilley and Dr. Joe Berman. So Berry, could you start off by kind of introducing yourself and what your role currently is in the community?
Sure. My name is Berry Dilley, and I am on the City Commission on Disabilities. I've been on now for almost 3 years, and back in 2004, I started it.
Great. And how about you, Dr. Berman?
Yeah, I'm Joe Berman, and I came to Athens, Ohio in the early 60s for graduate school, left, came back, taught most of my career here, and retired in 2002, looking for something to do until 2003 when we started working on the commission. But that's that basically, I ended up as the Dean of the Honors College before I left the campus and retired. So a full career of teaching and a little bit of tune-up on the blind side. My brother and I both had, in the mid-1970s, before ADA, of course, we were notified that by some doctors that we had a retinal degenerative disease, and that's where I got interested in Disabilities Commission, which wasn't even on the horizon here at that time. So,
yeah. So how did that come on the horizon then? How did you guys get together to decide to start this?
To start this commission, or to start where Joe came on?
Well,
See, I was already involved for 8 months before Joe came on.
okay, sure. So Berry, how about you start? How did all of this come about, and then we'll have Joe come in later with how he came involved.
Okay. And my guess is that we're going to have to do a whole nother segment, because that started out in November 2002 with me going to the mayor's office and saying, I'm overwhelmed with disabilities in my family. I don't know how to do it. There must be other people dealing with that. And what can we do? Because I didn't know who else to go to. I was informed by a social worker in town by the name of Tim Dransfield that funding came through silos. So if you were blind, you went to this silo. If you were hearing impaired, you went to this one. So my family had old age, blind, hearing impaired, brain cancer, and dementia among 3 people. And I didn't know how to pull that off. I was going to doctors 3 or 4 times a week. I was trying to figure out what to do, how to do it, where to go. And so after a couple of years of doing that, I thought, this is crazy. And that's when I showed up at Mayor Abel's office. Joe came in 8 months later when we were trying to figure out, we eliminated other possibilities of what we could do. Because at the meetings with Mayor Abel, we brought in several people who were with different agencies. And we'd say, well, how about this? No money for that. Well, how about that? No money for that. How about this? And finally I said, how about a commission on disabilities? Because my sister had sat on commissions. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. So I knew about commission. So I asked Mayor Abel, okay, if we had a commission, would you use it? And he said, yes. So that's when we started aiming at a commission. We also were looking at a CIL, which is Center for Independent Living, but they had one in Marietta already, or they were working on it. And the Marietta one would have covered Washington and Athens County. So we were covered there. So Joe and I and Larry Jacoman were going to put together the bylaws for a commission on disabilities. And so that's when we began in August of 2003. And I asked Joe yesterday, how did he get involved? Because I hadn't known Joe before this. So Joe, there's your transfer story with you and Larry.
Okay, it'll be a quick one. Larry lived diagonally across the street from me. He knew I had some visual difficulties, but I was managing everything pretty much without a cane at the time we moved into this house. And he saw me walking with a cane suddenly one day and came over and said, "So what's the situation with your vision?" And I told him, and he said, "Oh." And then the next thing I knew, he said, "Well, we're starting to do some work on a Disabilities Commission, and we'd like to get you involved if you're interested." And I said, "Certainly." And that was it. And the next thing I know, we were meeting Berry, I and Larry. And that was it.
Yeah, so it seems like you had a lot of support within the community to start this. Was that the case?
It was.
This wasn't very, in the scheme of things, this was not very long after the ADA.
Right.
And the ADA was just gradually becoming known, and people were changing reluctantly or having to do that. So when we started working on it, there wasn't objection, it was just not terrible awareness. And so when we started working with the different agencies and bringing people together, but we didn't have any problem getting the commission through.
Debbie Phillips helped a lot with that.
Yeah. Joe and Larry and I wrote the bylaws based on, the format was based on, I think, one of the earlier commissions. I think it might have been the Arts Commission. So we knew the shape of it. And then, well, Joe and I were talking yesterday, well, what was our thing that we're supposed to be doing? And it was, okay, well, we had dreams about what the commission could do, but then we had to fit it into what the city government could do. Right, Joe?
Right. And that was unknown pretty much. I mean, ADA was just pretty new still. I didn't know very much about ADA except through my brother, who also has the same disability. And we just started tackling it and talking to Larry and sitting around and figuring out this and that, writing some drafts. Larry would critique some of the things from bylaws, for the bylaws, and we ultimately ended up with something acceptable and passed it by the appropriate people. And that was the end of that, our part of it at that point anyway.
For me, it was difficult because I could see how much the city needed, how much people with disabilities needed, but then beginning to realize that there are parts of what the disability community needed couldn't be fulfilled by the city government. The city government could do the legal stuff, or requiring businesses to be accessible or fixing the streets, but there were lots of things that it couldn't do. So it was an education for me to begin to pull out my, take my big dreams and wishes and then bring them down and shape them so that they could fit within the governmental system.
Can you provide an example of that? Like what you wanted to do and then what you had to scale back? Because like, let's say I'm from Logan up in Hocking County, and I want to start a city commission on disabilities, but I don't really know where to begin. So, yeah, if you could just like provide maybe some examples or an anecdote of what that meant for you.
Well, for me, when Joe and I started talking about it, it was like, well, what does a person with a disability need, and how can those things be resolved in our community? Well, the CIL would have been much better for what I was looking for, because the CIL offers direct help to people for whatever they needed, whether it was service providers or helping you through the system, et cetera. The city commission was just one very limited part of that. So it took me a long time to get from what I was hoping for, which is like, oh God, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know how to manage all of this, to making the streets and businesses accessible. It was a big jump.
Yeah,
Right.
we really had to discuss it a lot among just the three of us who were working on the bylaws. We were looking at, well, what are the different sorts of disabilities in the community? And we had to know that, and we had to understand what was going to be difficult for people with different types of disabilities in the community, and on and on. And it was getting to be pretty complex. And so we searched within the community and got some information. I remember early on, we started, or at least I did, I know, and I think Berry did too, talked to some other people in the community and said, you know, what do you need? And it was a person with disabilities receiving the question. And we were talking to people that way and getting some idea of exactly the things that were impeding their mobility, let's say, or impeding their ability to work in a certain place in town, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the way it sort of continued for a while.
And I think Joe probably knew more about the ADA than I don't know. Had you read the ADA by that time, Joe?
I had by that time. My brother and I both started understanding about our blindness in the mid 70s, 1970s, which was not ADA time. And so both of us were sort of making our way through it all up until ADA. And by then I had already been working on campus here for many years. I came here in the 60s, as I mentioned. And so I'd been here for a long time, and we were just sort of working our way through it and figuring out what we could do for ourselves, and then realized that we could help others because we found other people who did not have any resources at the moment either. So that's where it started with me and my interest in ADA. And my brother said, well, let's talk about the ADA. And he did. He lives in Maryland. And so we talked on the phone a lot about it. I hadn't had a chance to read it with my job, and he was working mostly from home at the time as a consultant in a lot of things. And so we talked on the phone a bunch about ADA. So I've got to understand what are the important features of it, and realize that some of them would be appropriate here, some of them would not be actionable in the city of Athens even.
Mhm.
My understanding of the ADA came when we began all this stuff in 2002 and 3. And I had not read it. My sister knew some of it. But so I went, and they had the ADA on the city website. So I went and read it, and I tried to read it, but whoever put it on the website apparently cut and pasted it. So I'd go to read it, and I'd get confused because I couldn't figure out how this followed that. And at first I thought, well, maybe I was just, skipping over. So I read it 2 or 3 times, and I'm going, no. And as I remember, the requirements or the ability to have private residence accessible was stuck in the middle of public buildings. And I was trying to figure out how those things went together. It was very strange. So that was one of the things after the commission got established that Mary Abel wanted that to be the very, very first thing that the commission dealt with. I don't know how that all happened because I wasn't there, but that was my first introduction to the ADA.
The other thing about that just particular item, the ADA on the city website, was not accessible for blind people.
The website itself.
Yeah, the website itself was not, the content of it was not accessible for blind people. So if you were blind or hearing impaired even, it was not accessible. There was not alt text, as they call it, which presents alternative text to visual text. And there was no audio with it as well. So even a person like Berry could be very confused by trying to read it, which she tried to do because of the way it was pieced together, I guess, at that time. I tried to get something from it, and I couldn't get to any of the links because I couldn't hear any of them. I use a computer that has all sorts of technology built into it, And it looks for the links, and it tells you that it's looking for a link, and here's the link, and it mentions it, and then it has some underlying title of it when it comes up, and that's called alt text. And it wasn't there. There was nothing there. So the website was totally inaccessible to most people with hearing and visual impairment in the community.
What that says to me is that the ADA hadn't quite managed to get to Athens, Ohio yet. And, you know, a lot of people said it was going to take a long time because so much structure would happen and money would have to happen. And as I understand it in the beginning, it didn't say you have to accomplish this in 2 years or something. It was a very gradual process. So it was very gradual in Athens, Ohio. And so trying to get people even aware of the ADA, what it meant, what was in it, what needed to happen. Joe and I were getting to that place in 2003.
Right. Yeah. Can you elaborate on those journeys a little bit more and how you were able to determine what services were lacking for people with disabilities in Athens?
Well, we talked about maybe we needed, and this is a bridge piece actually. Some of this was discussed between Larry and I, and possibly Berry as well, before the Disability Commission was actually installed in the community. But we started saying, gee, we need people on the commission when it becomes a commission that have specific disabilities or interest areas. If they didn't have a disability now, but knew somebody in their family or had a family member who was interested in seeing some commission formed, then we really ought to try to involve them. We ought to test out thises and that's and whatever. I was interested very much in mobility because I was on the campus and walking everywhere by myself on campus to different buildings with a cane, and that was it. And it's quite an experience on a large campus when you're going to other buildings, whatever. So
Hey Joe,
at that point,
tell him the story about trying to get your building ADA.
oh yes, well, the building, my office is the Honors College office, is the little house that's next to the president's home. And it was totally inaccessible for anyone that needed physical assistance, like no elevator. It had front steps, 5 front steps. I remember exactly how many, no other entrance to the building that would have been possible for anyone. But particularly for somebody with disabilities, it was not accessible at all. We were told that the only way we could do anything about that was to renovate the whole building or parts of the building. And I thought, well, you know, there's some things that are wrong with the building. They're not ADA compliant. And so we itemized a few of them, and they were deciding to update the building as it was. Well, under ADA, the requirements are that if you redo a building and remanufacture it internally or whatever, you do have to meet ADA compliances. So we had a real run with getting people into our building. We had to actually cut into the porch. It had the surrounding front porch on the building. It was an old home, and we had to have a little elevator system put on the outside of the building off the driveway, and it took a bunch of construction, and part of a wall was taken down on the building, and almost no one used it anyway. So, but the real critical one was inside of our building at that time. It's quite different now, but inside the building, the bathroom was totally non-compliant under ADA, so it had to be totally renovated from scratch, and that's what happened to it. But
What year was that, Joe?
that would have been 97, something like that, 1997, just 7 years. And that was a mandate that was handed down by and to and from, I guess it was circular sort of thing, the planning office on the campus, who were the ones that did the architectural renovations and things like that. And they were responsible for what was going on inside my building at that point. But the other thing was, on my own, pretty much, I said, you know, I need to know the areas of the city that are having trouble. And I understood that the ATCO workshop here in town.
Hold on a second, because
Yeah.
that one goes after the commission.
Yeah,
He's talking about once he became a commission member, then he's going to tell you about that one.
yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that there's some bridging of this all, because
That's
even,
about 7 years later.
but even before the commission was actually formed, you know, I was on, you know, I could tell that there were problems with Stimson Avenue, the walkways there. There was a telephone pole, which is still there with, I think, utilities, right across from the U.S. Postal Service there. On the other side of the street, and that you can't pass, you couldn't pass a wheelchair past it. But there were other things on that street that I found later when I was on the commission, and I was lucky enough to be asked to serve on that first commission. But it was walking up the street and getting to a cut curb and finding that at the bottom of the cut curb was a storm sewer grate. Well, that's fine if you're walking with regular shoes and feet. If you're walking with a cane, the cane was going to go into the sewer slots, the grate, and it was in the same direction you were walking. So your cane could go right into the storm sewer, trip you on your face. If you were in a wheelchair, the wheels would go right into those slots because they were going in the same direction you were. And so I brought that to the attention of the city, and they.
With the city, but that was during the commission, right?
Right.
Okay, so
So
this happened in 2005. And I remember a little bit of this because although I didn't sit on the commission then, I went to a few of the meetings, and 3 or 4 people showed up in wheelchairs at the library, I think it was, or maybe it was at the bank. No, it was hot library. So they had major problems with Stimson Avenue in particular because ATCO, several of the people were in wheelchairs. So then you could take over, Joe, because it was Joe and a few other people went and explored all of Stimson Avenue and gave feedback. Okay, there you go.
From the bottom to the top of the street, there were multiple issues for anyone, even people just fully mobile and walkable and walking. The street sewer drains were, if all they had to do was turn the grates 90 degrees to let something like a wheelchair go over it. The cut curbs were not consistent up the street on the one side, the south side of the street. And so you could come up with a wheelchair up to one point and have a cut curb and then go up onto the curb. And the next thing you know, there's no cut curb on the other side to come down. Or in some cases, going past the post office, going from the post office to say the bank there on the corner, you would run into a median that had concrete on one side with a cut curb, and no concrete on the other side or concrete on one side with actually a barrier there. I'm visualizing it. And then the other side, you had the cut curb. So somebody could come right up to it and couldn't get up to the other side to get down into the driveway up to the bank. The bank didn't have a cut curb for their sidewalk from their driveway. There
was something for you too about trying to get into the bank. You had to back up into the street or something?
Yeah, way up. A number of people would do that. They would go around to Stewart Avenue, Stewart Street, I guess. And then there was a way of coming back in that way onto the sidewalk, coming around from the front. And we mentioned it to the president of the bank at the time, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea that this might impact we never even thought of it, you know?" And so the next thing we know, that was the beginning of a week. By Friday, he had a crew out there that was doing demolition and reconstruction of a cut curb that allowed people to pass from even their parking lot up into the front door of the bank. So.
Right. Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, so I'm thinking, you know, to back up a little bit, and you know, like I said, let's say, you know, I'm watching this, and I'm from a city or a town that really needs work like this done. So we covered, you know, just how you guys got together and the development of the bylaws. What happened next? can you take me through that next leg of the process and how you became a certified commission from the city?
Very no.
Okay. Joe and I were writing the bylaws and figuring out how to do that. Larry's job was to come in and go, nope, you can't do that. He was the one we were the dreamers, and he was the one that was trying to kind of shape it, And we used to kid him that he was the one that crossed the T's and dotted the I's. But you need somebody like that when you have dreamers like Joe and me. So we did that, and then Debbie Phillips, who was a brand new city council member, took this on, and I guess she wrote the ordinance that I don't know how this all goes, but we had to have an ordinance, and then she wrote it, and then it was passed, and I think it was in January of 2004, the first reading, and then the second reading was February of 2004, and that was when it was actually happened. So, and Joe, I drove Joe and my sister Clarissa, and we were there for that city council meeting when we were, we just upgraded. So then we became official. During all of this working time, there was a group that we called the Task Force on Disabilities. And that was a group of people from lots of different agencies who've been working on this for a year almost, trying to figure out what we could do, how we could do it. So the task force still existed, and I was hoping that it would continue after the city commission was established, so that this could be the community support system, if you will. So the task force planned a party, and we had this party in April as a big celebration and letting know the community that the commission existed now. We didn't have any members yet, but we had the commission. So the task force continued to work for a little while after that, but my memories are pretty slim on, finally, I couldn't do any more because I had family stuff to deal with. So then I asked Joe, because I don't know how, when the commissioners are actually chosen and when the formal first meeting happened. I don't know that.
And I don't remember either.
I know Mayor Abel his job was to put out requests or get people know and ask people to apply. And there are in the files application forms for different people. And so that then the first commission was formed. And I believe Barbara Conover was on the beginning, and Joe, and Larry, I presume, but I don't know who else.
I'm sorry, but it was a faculty member in political science, I think.
Oh, I know Don Dillinger too.
Oh, and Don Dillinger, that's right. And
Don Dillinger was a big activist for people with disabilities. He had polio as a kid, I guess. And then the polio came back and he was in a wheelchair. And so he'd been doing a lot. And so he came on.
He never missed a meeting.
That's pretty amazing. So I don't remember who else right now. We're going to have to look that one up for our next interview.
Yeah. So were there any points throughout this process where you felt like giving up? Was there ever like a tipping point?
Not for me.
Yeah.
Well, by the time Joe came in, it was happening. For me, earlier on, well, I know that Carolyn says something, what was our strategy? And I'm going, there was no strategy. I mean, it was like, we don't know what to do, but something needs to happen. Well, can we do this? No. Well, we can really do that? No, there's no way to do that. So it gradually began, but basically my sister, who was my motivator to get this happening, because she was an activist because she lost her eyesight with a brain tumor when she was 13. And so had been around the same time that Joe started having his problems in the 70s. No, Clarissa was 52 when she lost her eyesight.
I was 33.
Huh?
I was 33 at the time.
Yeah. Clarissa started with her disabilities in 52. So she went through the whole deal of having to find her way through school and profession, all that, before the ADA was even thought of. So she was a very, very active person and had sat on 2 commissions, one in Minneapolis and one in Salisbury, Maryland. So she came here when she then got another tumor, which turned out to be brain cancer. And her sight and her hearing was going down more. So she moved to Athens, and I was dealing with trying to help her, which is what began helping me understand what it's like to live in this, because, you know, I was 5 years older than she, so I never had to really deal with it close up until I was having to help her with everything. So when I started talking with Mayor Abel, and I said, well, there are commissions on disabilities, I know about that. And so my sister would inform me of what she'd been doing. So that's how we got that focus. And actually, she had a story before she sat on the commission in Minneapolis. Her friends, she had a number of friends that were in wheelchairs and had disabilities. And they wanted her to come and speak to the city government in Minneapolis in favor of curb cuts, because curb cuts were not common then, if they were at all. So she went and she spoke, and she speaks very, very well. She gets up and she says, well, as a blind person, I don't like curb cuts because they send me right to the street. I don't know, you know, and often they are on the corners. They're not perpendicular and parallel, you know, they cut corners. So it sends you right in the middle of the street. But she said, I don't like them, but there are people who with wheelchairs, there are all these other people who can really, really use them. So it's important. So let's get them. And soon after that, I guess she was on the commission. I don't know how the texture idea came about. Maybe that was because of her comments. I don't know.
I think that's part of the national requirement under ADA for cut curbs.
Yeah.
The angle of the cut curb mandated, of course, and width of doors and everything else are right specified. And some of them are applicable to a town as small as Athens. Some of them are not all applicable to a town of this size. So you have
Well, my sister was doing that show. That was before the ADA.
Oh, sure.
So they were kind of in the forefront.
Yep.
Yeah, so you had mentioned Minneapolis and is it Salisbury, Maryland?
Yeah.
So were those cities, were they kind of used as models as you were developing the bylaws and, you know, the goals for the commission?
Not directly, just through what my sister would say. We didn't look up anything or anything like that. Because those are big cities, besides the fact, and we're small. And we didn't do much research, to tell you the truth.
I did a little bit with my brother, who is in Maryland also now still, and who had a little connection with other disability organizations there. And so I got some information from him at the time we were looking for bylaw information or other sorts of things that we needed. But it was pretty casual. I mean, it was, you know, hit and miss.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do it like an academic process or something like that at all.
Sometimes things would just show up. Somebody would say something that tripped, wow, well, why don't we look at that too?
Yeah.
When we actually got the commission formed, and I don't mean to keep jumping into the future of the whole thing, but I remember in the meetings, we just decided that we needed some people on the commission who would specialize, even if it was only one person, in one particular facet. One was physical transportation systems, like the bus system in town. Somebody else, and the ability of cab drivers to deal with people, and how did they take care of people who needed a ride on a cab and only had a wheelchair? How could they collapse the wheelchair and make sure that they could put it in the trunk and all of that sort of thing? And so we had maybe one person who was a specialist in this and one person in that. And so we were challenged to go out and do something in that area. Mine was physical mobility in the streets of Athens. So I would walk around the blocks and find huge problems with stepping off a curb where there was no cut curb, And literally, there was a storm sewer right below the edge of the curb and no protection to the storm sewer. I mean, it was broken concrete. So you would be walking right on top of pieces of concrete where the storm sewer grate should have been. And it was unbelievable. So I was just making verbal notes of that on a recorder. And I took other people around, and then we took some people from the city streets and sidewalk area of the city. Walked around with them and said, hey, look at this, and look at how this works for a person either with a cane or a wheelchair. And they'd say, oh heavens, and they're writing notes down, I could tell. And we did a block at a time. We went around a complete block, a complete square.
And this work is still happening. A lot of those things have not been resolved yet, but there's much more awareness. There's much more awareness on the part of the city. There's more awareness on the part of the businesses on Court Street, what they can and cannot accomplish. Some things can't be accomplished in a city like this because the structure of old buildings, you know, it's just too hard. But I know that some of the commission members now are going up around town and talking to the business owners and trying to figure out how to solve these problems. So it's an ongoing effort, concern. But I think the wonderful part about it is people know now, they're trying harder. It's not like it was just totally ignorant, you know, just didn't know anything. Now they know, and they're doing the best they can. And the commission has a committee that's actually on accessibility, and they're going through town and checking that stuff out.
Yeah. So, so yeah, and this is something that, you know, you had mentioned it being an ongoing process, and I saw, this was a while ago, I think it was last year, there was a post that went viral on Facebook about those scooters that can get parked in the middle of a sidewalk, and then all of a sudden that sidewalk becomes inaccessible to someone using a mobility device or someone who is vision impaired. And there were a lot of comments that were very surprising to me, that, you know, they were saying, so what? Like, that's not my problem. And that there's clearly an empathy deficiency there, but what would you, what would you say to those people that are just like, hey, like, why is this important? Why should I care? You know, like, how would you address that?
Well, the same thing is going on right now with masks.
Yeah.
I mean, just an ignorance or a self-centeredness that goes, it's not my business.
That's right. Now, my favorite phrase, which people that have disabilities are familiar with, it's TAB. People are TABs, temporarily able-bodied, only for a certain amount of your life, even if you don't have a, quote, recognizable wheelchair, needing wheelchair disability or something of that sort. People, as they age, sometimes can't read the thermostat in their home. My dad, as a matter of fact, had terrible vision most of his life, and he had glasses, but even as he aged, the glasses were no help. So he had a magnifying glass and a little electric flashlight on top of their thermostat at home to look at it and be able to know how to set the thermostat. I have a talking thermostat in our house, but a lot of people aren't aware of those sorts of things. But gee, I lost her first name. Conover. Barbara. Yeah, I was just blank there. Barbara Conover was very good at that because she used to help design accessible houses, and maybe still does, for all I know. I don't know at the moment.
She's not doing that anymore, but I'm hoping we can get her a lot more active in the city.
But things like the placement of electric sockets on the wall, electric outlets on a wall. You know, some people, if they're in a wheelchair, they're not going to be able to get way, way, way down. So the outlet may very well have to be higher up on a wall. So in fact, we started talking to some architects, as I remember, on the university campus about asking for, no, I can't remember what the path was, but we were talking to somebody who was building some apartments in the community, and asked them if they could identify some components of an apartment complex that would be accessible, lower countertops, lower cabinetry, things like this, which was tripped by Barbara Conover. I mean, we picked that all up from her too. And I think we had some success with that, with some local contractors. And I remember, I think one of the complexes that did that, they identified several housing components of their whole unit. It's still in place as far as I know. And
This is all with the commission, right?
right.
Yeah.
But we were talking about all of that stuff and thinking about it all earlier even. I mean,
Yeah.
when somebody would come in to one of our meetings or even say, I hear you're putting a commission together. I've really got this kind of a problem. And sometimes, as you might guess, people were pretty adamant about needing it. But when you say, why should I worry? It doesn't bother me. Someday it might be an impediment to them.
There's something else we did do as the commission, we, meaning I wasn't there most of this, but I think this was Larry's real contribution, with something called Disability Speaks and Challenged by Choice.
Oh, yes.
And that was to get people in the community to volunteer to take on a disability for several hours. And that would help what you were talking about, the people that, why do I care?
Yeah.
They kind of walked around in the shoes of somebody with disabilities for a little while. It opens up a whole different understanding. Yeah. But even then, the last time we did Challenged by Choice, I was the chair of that. And I tried to get contractors and builders and architects to participate so that they could be more aware of the structure of the buildings they were designing and building. We couldn't get anybody to come from that group in that meeting. I contacted all kinds of folks. We did get 2 real estate agents, and that was the closest we could get to that. And if you build a house, it's going to be there for 50 years or something. So if you build it inaccessible, it's going to be inaccessible for 50 years. And there's a development that I saw going up toward Stroud's Run, where all these beautiful, huge, expensive houses that are totally inaccessible. You can't even get down or up to them because there are all these hills. Now those people, they buy these houses, they live there, and maybe sometime later they're temporarily abled, disappears, and they are not. And then they'll go, oh, well, I guess we have to move. Where are we going to move to? And there's no place because they didn't plan ahead. And that's the thing that's been dear to my heart. And I don't know whether we can do this, but to change the local laws, ordinances, whatever they are, to require a certain standard of accessibility for all new housing and all new major renovations. I've been wanting that since 2004, and that hasn't happened yet. But I keep kind of pushing on it because it's silly. It's silly to keep building buildings that are totally inaccessible. There are houses you have to go up 4 or 5 steps, walk in, and then you have to go up more steps or down more steps to get into the house.
And in fact, there is even a little bit of a problem with one of the public buildings here in Athens, right at the foot of the street I live on, that I brought to the attention of somebody who was talking about disabilities in that building. I won't mention where it is, but there is a cut curb. It's not a cut curb, it's a ramp up to the front of the building. And the ramp is slightly canted to one side, and somebody walking can actually topple as they're walking if they're using a cane. And if it's a wheelchair going up that same ramp, it would start leaning because there's a little bit of a rise on the right hand side but not on the left. So a lot of issues. I mean, lots of little subtle issues, and the design of homes and ramps to them and so forth is critical.
You can't, the ADA gives guidelines, but I think unless you're walking that, you're doing it either temporarily or in that situation, you can't really know. I mean, like with my sister, I didn't know until actually I was traveling with her for 3 weeks. where I had to help get her clothes out, put her clothes away, help find her shoes, help her move through places, carry her luggage. And all of a sudden, I knew a whole lot better what her life was like. And then you get a different respect for that, you know. But unless you're close to it, I didn't know until she moved here, and I was living with it all the time. More.
Right. Yeah, so in the process of developing the commission, setting the goals, writing the bylaws, you know, getting all of the input from all of the people that worked on this with you, is there anything that you would go back and do differently?
Well, I suppose knowing what we know now, maybe, but not knowing what we did then. I mean, it was a matter of discovery and the time.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody now, there's a whole lot more been achieved. We have the ADA. It's been implemented a lot more. People know a lot more. So maybe it would be a lot simpler. But we were going by the seat of our pants.
Yeah. And it seemed to work pretty well. Look at it now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least the commission is still running. It has, I don't know how many people are on the commission currently, but
11, I think.
11. Mm-hmm. Are they all people with disabilities? I've not been to any of the meetings, but.
Not all. I mean, I'm on it. The only disability I got is being old. And we have more people sitting on committees, this is one of the things I would say. Now, in the beginning, you got people who could be there and who worked, but it was even figuring out how to make it work well. My thought when the commission first started was we have a group of people who are on the commission, and then we have committees that are other people with a commission member chairing it. But that didn't happen for a long time. The committees were the commissioners, and the commissioners were the committees, so they all were overlapping everything, and we needed to get a lot more people involved. Yeah. Now, we've got a whole lot more people involved, a whole lot more energy and direction, but that took a long time to happen. Mm-hmm. You know, it took a long time to figure out how to do it, to get support from the community to move along. Energy, you know, because too often, and seems to me often, but when you have a lot of people with disabilities on the commission, people with disabilities are limited in their energy sometimes or their abilities, and may not be able to have the energy to push something through. So it takes longer. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yes, yeah. And one of the interesting things is, and I'm sure that Berry's had the same experience, as we travel around the country or travel other places even, something hits you right smack in the face that's being done elsewhere that might very well work well here. The state of California, apparently, in public parking lots, okay, public parking buildings, I guess, or maybe lots itself, but I'm thinking of inside of buildings, where you have to drive in, take the ticket out, and so forth. Anybody who displays an ADA permit on their car gets free parking, even in hotel parking lots that are inside of the building. I had that brought to my attention in California when I was visiting some students, former students of mine, and we met at a Sheraton hotel, and I pulled in with a rental car, and the woman saw me walking up to the front desk and said, oh, my wife was driving, I wasn't driving. But, but we walked up to the front desk to check in, and she said, does your car have a handicap permit on it? And I said, no, it's a rental car. And I didn't bring it with me, I'm from Ohio. And she said, oh, well, do you have a permit back in Ohio? I said, yes, I do. She said, well, your parking is free. So we didn't have to pay any of the parking at the hotel parking lot because it was a public lot and used by other people other than just the visitors or the residents of the park of the hotel. And the same thing in the state of Maryland. My brother lives in Maryland, and the public parking lots that are in buildings, I guess, I'm not sure that it applies to street parking meters, but if you went into a building, they have to give you, but what they do is they take your ADA tag, and you have to write the number, take it off your windshield or your rear view mirror, and write that on the back of the ticket, the ticket that you took to get into the lot. And when you leave the lot, you show the ticket, your tag, and hand them the ticket for the payment, and you give it to the person in the little thing, and they verify the number, and that's the end of it. And then you drive out, which I think is nice. And some cities have extended meter time for people with disabilities. If you have a 2-hour parking maximum on the streets, meters uptown, which we do, and the handicapped meters are only 2 hours as well. In many cities I've been in, they extend that. That is actually a 3-hour limit, because people have more time to get out. If they're dealing with a wheelchair, that takes extra time. If they're moving from in a wheelchair to a building nearby, that takes extra time, and the reverse is the same. So they've added an extra hour onto your meter time automatically when you put in the meter is set. Those particular meters are set for that, which I think is not a bad thing. We might think of that in Athens.
Yeah. So that leads me to my last question, which is so we're approaching in the next couple years the 20th anniversary of the commission. So that'll be in what, 2023, 2024. What are your hopes for the next 20 years?
That we won't need any of this. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. Yeah. I often say that a lot about, my line of work, which is, community action, anti-poverty. It's like, it's my ultimate goal is to work myself out of a job. So, yeah. Is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't discussed or we haven't touched on, or, just last, we're approaching the 1 hour mark. So the last minute thoughts.
Yeah. Berry and I talked so much back in March before we were going to do it then. And so many other things came up in our conversations, and there's just so much more to talk about and to tell and to be thoughtful about for the future. And it's still going to be an issue. I'd hope that it wouldn't be, but there will still be issues.
I know something that is, I thought of this the other day. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could get to the point that all of our energy was put into prevention? Because if we didn't have poverty, if we didn't have pollution, if we didn't have people getting cancer from the water supply or from air, and I would really like actually the commission to start working on prevention as well as accessibility for those with people who have disabilities now. Because I'm thinking about the DuPont down on the river and all of what happened with the water there. And then earlier on, people, the miners with black lung, with the lead paint. And these are still issues going on. But I think it'd be wonderful if people in our commission could start thinking about simple ways in some, but also just thinking about prevention. Even I went to go to a meeting. There was some years ago, there was a group that would meet monthly for Brain Injury Association. And there was a guy that came who had been in a motorcycle accident and was not in very good shape. And he was against passing legislation that you would have to wear helmets if you were riding motorcycles. And I'm going, you wouldn't be here perhaps if you had had a helmet. And so that the little vindictive part of me is going, okay, you don't have to wear a helmet, but you know what? Then you don't get any medical support afterward if you have an accident. I mean, so if we made sure these laws were passed, made sure that, like, even, I don't know when the city rec center, community center was built, and they had the skate park out and back. Last I heard, they were not requiring those kids to wear helmets. Now, whether that's changed or not, I don't know. But those kids should be wearing helmets. So that's the kind of stuff we could begin to do, really beginning to look at prevention.
Yeah, I think that's, you sent me an email about that. So yes, I think that's a wonderful idea. So, so yeah, but okay, so it's about 1:59 p.m. We've been talking for almost an hour, but like Joe said, I mean, there's so much that we can really delve into. And I think the last time we spoke about this series, I mean, we could really do like 8 installments, probably more. So we might be hearing from you both again very soon, but thank you both for your time today and everything that you've done for our city. I'm really excited to be working on this project and to have spoken with you today, just to be able to document all of the incredible work you've done. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Claire.
Thank
See
you.
you, Joe.
All right, thank you everyone. And yeah, when I log off, it'll stop recording, and so I'll upload it and I'll share it with you once everything's done processing. So
You got it all tidied up.
yeah.
All
All right.
I have something to add to your bailiwick, Claire. So if I can talk to you for a minute afterwards.
Sure. Okay. All right. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Sure,
Have a good day.
All right. Thank you.